Narrated by a man. I used to believe that pain announced itself loudly, that it came with screams, breakdowns, and dramatic moments that made it obvious something was wrong. I was wrong. Sometimes pain arrives quietly, sitting across from you in a sterile doctor's office, disguised as a calm voice saying words that permanently rearrange your future. Your chances of carrying a pregnancy to term are extremely low. The doctor kept talking, explaining options, statistics, percentages, but all I could hear was the sound of something inside me collapsing. I nodded politely. I even thanked him. Then I walked to the parking lot, sat in my car, and cried so hard my chest physically hurt. Daniel tried to be strong for both of us. He held my hand on the drive home, told me we'd figure something out, that a family wasn't defined by biology. I smiled and agreed. But later that night, when he was asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like my body had betrayed me. It wasn't just infertility. It was grief. Grief for a version of myself I had already imagined. A mother braiding hair, packing lunches, complaining about messy rooms. That version of me felt gone. We didn't tell anyone right away. Not our friends. Not our parents. And definitely not my twin sister. Sarah and I had always been close in a way that felt unexplainable to outsiders. Same face. Same laugh. Same childhood memories. People used to joke that we shared one soul split into two bodies. But even twins have differences. Sarah was fearless, loud, confident. I was cautious, quiet, always thinking 5 steps ahead. Growing up, she protected me. As adults, I depended on her more than I wanted to admit. Which is why telling her felt dangerous. The truth came out on a random Sunday afternoon. She came over unannounced, as she always did, carrying coffee and that familiar energy that filled every room she entered. "You look tired," she said, studying my face. I tried to laugh it off. She didn't buy it. What happened? I broke. The words spilled out. Doctors, tests, miscarriages, the quiet dread I carried every day. Sarah didn't interrupt. She didn't soften her expression. She just listened. When I finished, the room felt unbearably quiet. Then she said something that changed everything. "I'll carry your baby." I laughed at first. A nervous laugh. An impossible laugh. "You don't mean that," I said. She did. "I'm serious, Iman. I'm healthy. We share DNA. If anyone should do this for you, it's me." My heart pounded. The idea felt unreal. Terrifying. Miraculous. Daniel walked in halfway through the conversation. Sarah repeated it to him without hesitation. "I'll be your surrogate." His reaction was different. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He hesitated. That hesitation stayed with me. He asked questions. Practical ones. Legal ones. Emotional ones. What if it complicates things? What if someone gets attached? What if it changes your relationship? I understood his concerns. But beneath them, I sensed something else. Fear. Not of the process. Of proximity. Still, after weeks of conversations, counseling sessions, and legal consultations, we agreed. We signed contracts. Set boundaries. Defined roles. On paper, everything was clear. Sarah would carry our child. Daniel and I would be the parents. She would be the aunt. Simple. Clean. Safe. Or so I thought. The IVF process began. Appointments. Hormones. Schedules. I went with Sarah to every early visit. Held her hand. Made jokes. Thanked her constantly. She brushed it off. "That's what sisters do," she said. Daniel came too. At first. Then work got busy. Sarah told me not to worry. "He asks about you all the time," she said. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? The first ultrasound felt magical. That heartbeat. That tiny flicker of life on a screen. I cried. Sarah squeezed my hand. Daniel stood slightly behind us. I didn't think anything of it then. But looking back, that was the first moment I felt separate. Like I was watching something that involved me, but didn't fully belong to me. As weeks passed, Sarah's pregnancy became the center of everything. Family dinners revolved around her cravings. Conversations focused on her comfort. I was grateful, but also invisible. People congratulated her. They touched her belly. They asked how she was feeling. Rarely did anyone ask how I was handling becoming a mother through someone else's body. I told myself that was selfish. That sacrifice was part of the deal. Daniel started spending more time with Sarah, driving her to appointments, checking in on her. "It's about the baby," he said. I nodded. But sometimes I noticed the way he smiled when she joked. The way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. I dismissed it. They were family. I was being paranoid. One night, I overheard them laughing in the kitchen. A deep, relaxed laugh I hadn't heard from Daniel in months. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. For a second, I felt like an outsider in my own home. The feeling scared me enough that I forced myself to ignore it. By the end of the first trimester, everything was officially announced. Social media posts, celebration dinners, smiling photos. I stood beside Sarah in every picture. Same face, different role. People joked about how confusing it must be. I laughed with them. But inside, a quiet question began forming. If we look the same, and she's carrying the baby, where does that leave me? I didn't know it yet. But part one wasn't about surrogacy. It was about the first crack. The moment where love, gratitude, and trust began to blur into something far more dangerous. And none of us, not me, not Daniel, not even Sarah, were prepared for what that crack would eventually break open. There's a strange thing that happens when you try to be endlessly grateful. You start ignoring your own discomfort. That's what I did during the second trimester. I convinced myself that every uneasy feeling was selfish. Every flicker of jealousy was ungrateful. Every moment of loneliness was something I simply had to endure, because Sarah was doing something extraordinary for me. So I swallowed it all. And the more I swallowed, the quieter my voice became. By the 4th month of Sarah's pregnancy, routines had formed. Daniel picked her up for appointments. Daniel checked her vitals. Daniel reminded her to take her vitamins. At first, I was included. Then slowly, I wasn't. "It's just easier this way," Daniel said one evening, shrugging as he slipped on his jacket. "You've had a long day." I nodded. I always nodded. Because if I said no, I'd sound insecure. If I protested, I'd sound ungrateful. And if I admitted the truth, that I felt replaced, I was terrified of what that would say about me. Sarah changed too. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just subtly. She stopped asking me before making decisions. She'd update Daniel before she told me. She began saying "the baby likes" instead of "your baby likes." Each word landed softly, but together they formed something heavy. One afternoon, I asked her gently, "Can you loop me in more? I feel a little left out." She looked surprised. "Oh, man," she said quickly. "I didn't even think about it. You know I'd never do anything without you." I believed her. I wanted to. But belief doesn't erase patterns. Daniel and Sarah developed inside jokes. Shared memories I wasn't part of. I'd enter a room and conversations would pause. Not suspiciously, just awkwardly, like I'd interrupted something intimate. I told myself intimacy wasn't the same as attraction. Families can be close. Right. The baby kicked for the first time on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I wasn't there. Sarah called me, breathless with excitement. "I felt it," she said. Daniel felt it too. It was amazing. The word "too" echoed in my head. I congratulated her. I congratulated him. Then I locked myself in the bathroom and cried silently so no one would hear. I hated myself for that moment. I hated that my first reaction wasn't joy, but grief. That night, I finally said something. "I feel like I'm disappearing," I told Daniel as we lay in bed. "Like I'm becoming a background character in my own life." He sighed. "You're overthinking," he said gently. "This is stressful for everyone." That hurt more than anger would have. Because dismissal feels like erasure. I tried harder after that. I attended every family gathering. I smiled wider. I laughed louder. I became the easy one. The accommodating one. The one who didn't complain. And in doing so, I unknowingly gave everyone permission to keep crossing lines. One evening, I came home early from work. I heard voices in the living room. Daniel and Sarah. Not arguing. Talking quietly. I stood in the hallway, unseen. I just want what's best for the baby, Daniel said. So do I, Sarah replied softly. That's why I worry about a man sometimes. My chest tightened. What do you mean? He asked. She hesitated. She seems distant. Like this isn't real to her yet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run in and say, I'm distant because you're pushing me away. But I didn't. Because part of me wondered. What if she was right? The pregnancy progressed. Sarah glowed. Daniel hovered. And I faded. People started mistaking Sarah for the baby's mother in public. She corrected them at first. Then, she stopped. I didn't have the energy, she told me once. It's awkward to explain. I nodded. But something inside me cracked. At night, I'd place my hand on my stomach, even though there was nothing there. I whispered to a child who couldn't hear me yet. I'm still here, I said. I promise. I needed to hear it myself. The boundary crossing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. And that's what made it dangerous. Because no one noticed, except me. And I was too afraid to say it out loud. By the end of part 2, one thing was painfully clear. This wasn't just about carrying a baby anymore. It was about ownership. About emotional territory. About who was slowly being written out of the story. And I was terrified that by the time I found my voice again, it would already be too late. There's a difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion whispers. Certainty breaks something. For a long time, I lived in the space between the two, telling myself stories to stay sane, rearranging facts so they wouldn't hurt as much. I learned how to look at what was happening without seeing it. Until one night made that impossible. By the 6th month of the pregnancy, Sarah had practically moved into our lives. Not our house, yet. But emotionally, she was everywhere. Daniel talked about her day more than he talked about mine. He knew what she'd eaten, how she'd slept, what made her anxious. He noticed the smallest changes in her mood. He didn't notice when I stopped talking. I became quieter, shorter in my answers. Tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. And still, no one asked why. It started with a message. I was on Daniel's laptop, ordering groceries, when a notification popped up. He hadn't logged out of his email. I didn't mean to read it. I swear I didn't. But the subject line froze me in place. Did she notice? My heart started racing before I even opened it. The sender, Sarah. My hands shook as I clicked. I don't think she noticed tonight. But we have to be more careful. Careful. That word felt sharp. I closed the laptop immediately, my chest tight, my ears ringing. I told myself there had to be an innocent explanation. They were talking about the baby. Or a surprise. Or my stress. Anything but the truth forming in my mind. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I watched. And once you start watching closely, you see everything. Daniel began texting constantly, but tilting his phone away from me. Sarah started visiting without telling me first, coordinating directly with him. One afternoon, I came home early again. I heard them in the kitchen. This time, I didn't announce myself. I hate lying to her, Sarah said quietly. Daniel's voice was low. Intimate. I know. But right now, we have to protect the baby. Protect. From me. My legs felt weak. I stepped into the doorway. They jumped apart like teenagers caught doing something wrong. Man. Sarah said too quickly. You're home early. Daniel avoided my eyes. I smiled. I smiled because if I didn't, I might fall apart right there on the tile floor. That night, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. Is there something going on between you two? The room went still. Daniel looked offended. Hurt? What? He said. Of course not. Sarah laughed nervously. A man, that's ridiculous. I wanted to believe them. So I apologized. For doubting. For being hormonal. For letting fear get the best of me. They accepted my apology. And something inside me died quietly. A week later, the truth stopped whispering. It spoke. Sarah went into preterm observation after a scare. Daniel rushed her to the hospital. I followed in my own car, heart pounding. In the waiting room, tension filled the air. A nurse approached. Only immediate support person allowed, she said, looking at Daniel. He stood up. Not me. Him. I watched as he walked past me and followed Sarah down the hall. No hesitation. No glance back. I sat alone, staring at the wall, feeling something ancient and raw crack open inside me. Hours later, I went to find the restroom. As I passed one of the private consultation rooms, I heard voices. Daniel's. Sarah's. The door wasn't fully closed. I don't know how much longer we can keep this from her, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Daniel exhaled. I know. But after the baby's born, everything will make sense. My breath caught. What if she doesn't forgive us? Sarah whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said the words that rewrote my life. She doesn't have to understand everything. My knees buckled. I pressed my hand against the wall to stay upright. They kept talking. About plans. About timing. About me, as if I wasn't a person, but an obstacle. I walked away before they could see me. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember unlocking the door. I just remember sitting on the bedroom floor, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment. Every excuse. Every time I told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. The betrayal wasn't physical, at least not yet. But emotional betrayal cuts deeper. Because it rewrites reality. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked hollow, but her eyes were clear. Clear enough to finally ask the question I'd avoided the longest. If the baby is born tomorrow, where do I stand? I met with a therapist that afternoon. For the first time, I said it out loud. I think my husband is emotionally attached to my twin sister. Saying it made it real. And real things demand action. I didn't confront them immediately. I needed proof. I needed clarity. I needed to stop being the woman who apologized for being hurt. By the end of part 3, one truth was undeniable. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't imagining things. I was being erased, slowly, quietly, by the two people I trusted most. And the worst part, they thought they were doing it for the baby. There's a moment in every betrayal where pain turns into clarity. Not strength, not courage, just clarity. And once you see clearly, you can never go back to pretending. After the hospital incident, I stopped asking questions. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I already had them. Instead, I watched. I listened. I documented everything. Messages Daniel forgot to delete. Appointments I was excluded from. Conversations that suddenly stopped when I entered the room. They weren't hiding anymore. They were assuming I'd stay quiet. Sarah moved into our house temporarily. It's easier, Daniel said. In case something happens. Something had already happened. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of them in the kitchen. Laughing. Planning. Existing like a couple preparing for a child. And I felt like a guest in my own marriage. One night, I finally snapped. Not screaming. Not crying. Just honest. I feel like you're replacing me, I told Daniel. He looked exhausted, not guilty. That's not fair, he said. This isn't about you. That sentence broke me more than any confession could have. Because when your husband tells you the pregnancy of your child isn't about you, you realize how far gone things are. Sarah tried to play peacemaker. We're all just under stress, she said softly. You know I love you. I looked at her. Really looked. Same face. Different loyalties. Then why do you talk about me like I'm not here? I asked. She froze. Daniel stood up. Defensive. You're twisting things, he said. This negativity isn't good for the baby. There it was again. The baby. Always the shield. I stopped sleeping in our bed after that. I slept in the guest room, the room Sarah would soon need for the nursery. Ironic. The final line was crossed 2 weeks later. I came home early again. Some habits die hard. I heard music playing softly upstairs. I climbed the steps slowly. The bedroom door was open. They were sitting on the bed together. Not touching, but close. Too close. Daniel's hand rested on Sarah's knee. Instinctively. Comfortably. He didn't move it when he saw me. That was worse than if he had. I think you should leave, Daniel said. Not to her. To me. The room tilted. You want me to leave my own house? I asked quietly. It's not safe for you to be this stressed, he replied. Sarah needs calm. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Because suddenly, everything made sense. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood something crucial. Staying silent wasn't noble anymore. It was enabling. I stayed with a friend. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Then a therapist. Then myself. I stopped asking, how do I keep this family together? And started asking, what do I need to survive this with my soul intact? By the end of part 4, one thing was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It wasn't temporary. It was betrayal wrapped in responsibility. And the baby hadn't even been born yet. People think betrayal is loud. They imagine screaming matches, slammed doors, dramatic confessions that leave no room for doubt. But the most devastating betrayals arrive calmly, spoken in measured tones, dressed up as reason, and delivered by someone who claims they're doing what's best for everyone. That's how Daniel destroyed our marriage. Not with anger. With logic. I was staying at my friend Lila's apartment when Daniel finally asked to meet. Not to apologize. Not to explain. To talk things through, he said. I already knew that meant he'd made up his mind. We met at a cafe halfway between our lives. Neutral ground. He arrived early. Calm. Composed. Almost relieved. That alone told me everything. I want this to be civil, he began. For the baby. Always the baby. I nodded, bracing myself. I've been thinking, he continued. And I believe the healthiest environment, for now, is for Sarah to remain the primary caregiver after birth. I stared at him. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. You're saying, what exactly? I asked slowly. That she should keep the baby with her, he said. At least temporarily. Temporarily. The most dangerous word in any betrayal. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. And where do I fit into this? I asked. Daniel sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. You'll still be involved, he said. But Sarah's already bonded. The baby recognizes her heartbeat. Her voice. Separating them immediately could be traumatic. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I suddenly understood how easy it is for people to rewrite reality when it suits them. And what about me? I asked. My bond. My consent. My role as the mother who planned this child for years. He looked genuinely puzzled. This isn't about ownership, Eman, he said. It's about stability. Stability. As if my entire existence was an inconvenience. I realized then that Daniel had already moved on emotionally. He wasn't asking for my agreement. He was informing me of my demotion. When I confronted Sarah later that night, her reaction was worse. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She cried. And somehow, that made me feel like the villain. I never planned for this, she said through tears. But the baby feels like part of me. I can't just hand them over like an object. I stared at her. You were never supposed to be handing me the baby, I said. You were supposed to be helping me become a mother. She looked away. That's when I knew. She had already crossed the line in her heart. The legal consultations began the next day. Contracts were reviewed. Clauses analyzed. On paper, everything was clear. The embryo was created using my egg. The intent was documented. Sarah had no parental rights. But emotions complicate law. And Daniel was preparing to fight, not for me, but against me. The most painful realization wasn't that he sided with Sarah. It was that he believed he was being noble. "I'm doing this for the baby," he told me during our last private conversation. "One day, they'll thank me." I looked at him. "You're not choosing the baby," I said quietly. "You're choosing the version of yourself that doesn't have to face what you've done." He didn't respond. I filed for separation a week later. Not out of spite. Out of survival. Something shifted inside me the moment I signed the papers. I stopped hoping he'd change his mind. And started preparing to protect myself. The media didn't know yet. Our families didn't know yet. But the war lines were drawn. Daniel and Sarah believed they had moral ground. They believed love and proximity would outweigh legality. They underestimated one thing. I wasn't fighting to win. I was fighting to exist. By the end of part 5, this much was clear. Daniel had made his choice. Sarah had made hers. And I was done asking anyone for permission to claim my place in this story. Because the next chapters wouldn't be about feelings. They would be about consequences. There's something terrifying about hearing your life described in legal terms. Not as memories. Not as intentions. But as clauses, precedents, and potential outcomes. The first time a lawyer referred to my unborn child as the subject, I nearly walked out. But I stayed. Because walking away was no longer an option. My attorney, Marianne, didn't sugarcoat anything. "Legally," she said, "you have strong standing. Genetically and contractual, you are the intended mother." I exhaled. Then she added, "Emotionally, this could get messy." That was an understatement. Daniel hired his own lawyer. So did Sarah. 2 separate legal teams. 2 separate narratives. 1 shared child. Daniel's argument was carefully constructed. He wasn't accusing me of being unfit. He was positioning Sarah as more stable. "She's already bonded," his attorney argued. "She's been the primary caregiver during pregnancy. She provides a calmer environment." Calmer. As if heartbreak were a personality flaw. Sarah's legal stance was even more painful. She wasn't claiming ownership. She was claiming attachment. "I'm not trying to steal the baby," she said during mediation. "I just want what's best for them." Everyone nodded. No one looked at me. Mediation felt like sitting in a room where everyone spoke about me, but not to me. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. "I agreed to surrogacy because I trusted my family," I said. That trust was broken. But that doesn't erase my motherhood. Silence followed. Not agreement. Not support. Just discomfort. The pregnancy advanced. Every week that passed strengthened Sarah's emotional argument. Every kick. Every ultrasound. Every lullaby she sang. I was losing time. And time, in court, can become evidence. Then Marianne found something. Messages. Deleted texts recovered through legal discovery. Daniel and Sarah hadn't just crossed emotional boundaries. They'd discussed keeping the baby together. Not as a temporary measure. As a future. My stomach turned as I read the words. Maybe this is how it was always meant to be. My lawyer looked up at me. "This changes things," she said quietly. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I met Daniel in a private office. I placed the printed messages between us. "You planned this," I said. He didn't deny it. He just looked tired. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you," he said. I laughed. "You didn't mean for it to include me," I replied. Sarah broke down when confronted. "I didn't think it would go this far," she sobbed. But it already had. And tears don't undo intent. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. For all 3 of us. That's when it hit me. Motherhood wasn't being decided by love. It was being decided by perception. I worked with a therapist daily. Not to prove I was perfect, but to prove I was present. I rebuilt myself piece by piece. Because if this fight demanded strength, I would meet it unbroken. By the end of part 6, the truth was undeniable. This was no longer a family conflict. It was a custody war before birth. And the next decision wouldn't be made by hearts, but by a judge who would decide what family looked like for my child. Some days live in your memory forever. Not because they were beautiful, but because they split your life into before and after. The day my child was born was one of those days. Sarah went into labor at 3:17 a.m. I was asleep on Lila's couch when my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered not answering. But this wasn't about him anymore. So I picked up. "It's happening," he said. His voice shook, not with fear, but with urgency. "We're at Mercy Hospital." I hung up without responding. The drive to the hospital felt unreal. The city lights blurred as tears filled my eyes. Not tears of joy, but grief. I had imagined this day 1,000 times. I'd pictured holding my baby first, whispering promises, feeling whole. Instead, I was arriving as an outsider. When I reached the maternity floor, a nurse stopped me. "Are you immediate family?" she asked. I opened my mouth, then hesitated. What was I now? "Yes," I said finally. "I'm the mother." She looked at her clipboard. Only one support person allowed. And that person was already inside. Hours passed. Every sound felt amplified. Every minute stretched painfully long. Finally, a doctor emerged. "The baby's been delivered," he said. My heart stopped. "How is she?" I asked. The doctor smiled. "Healthy. Strong lungs." "She, my daughter." I nearly collapsed. But then he added, "There's a complication. The surrogate is experiencing distress and is refusing to release the baby." The words didn't make sense. Refusing. I repeated. "She's requesting extended skin-to-skin contact," he explained carefully. "And the father is supporting her request." The father. Not my husband. I demanded to see them. The hospital staff hesitated, then allowed it under supervision. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah lay in the bed, exhausted, pale. My daughter was on her chest. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting protectively near the baby. Not me. Something primal rose inside me. "I want to hold my child," I said. Sarah looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Daniel stood up. "A man, please," he said. "This isn't the time." I laughed. A broken sound. "If not now," I asked, "then when?" Hospital security was called. Lawyers were contacted. The baby was placed in the nursery, away from all of us. That moment destroyed any illusion of family that remained. Hours later, a judge issued an emergency order. Temporary custody would remain neutral. No one would take the baby home. Not yet. I sat alone in the waiting room as my daughter slept behind glass. Unable to touch her. Unable to feed her. Unable to comfort her. But still, her mother. Daniel avoided my eyes. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably. And I realized something devastatingly clear. No matter how this ended, nothing would ever be the same again. The first headline appeared before I even left the hospital. I didn't search for it. A friend sent it to me, hands shaking as she passed me her phone. Surrogate baby caught in custody battle before leaving hospital. No names, no details, but enough for the world to start guessing. And guessing is cruel. By morning, the story had spread. Speculation exploded online. Some people painted Sarah as a selfless hero. Others painted me as a cold woman trying to take a baby she didn't carry. No one knew the truth. And no one asked. Court was scheduled quickly. Emergency hearings don't allow time to breathe. They don't allow healing. They demand proof. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Heavy. Sarah sat on one side, wrapped in sympathy. Daniel sat beside her. I sat alone. That alone hurt more than anything else. The judge listened carefully. Medical records, contracts, psych evaluations, and then messages. The recovered messages between Daniel and Sarah. Plans. Language that suggested intent beyond surrogacy. The courtroom shifted. For the first time, people looked at me, not as an obstacle, but as a woman betrayed. Sarah testified. "I never meant to hurt my sister," she said. "I just fell in love with the baby." The judge asked calmly, "With the baby, or with the family you imagined?" Silence. Daniel testified next. He spoke about stability, continuity, bonding. Then the judge asked, "Why did you exclude the intended mother?" Daniel didn't have an answer. I testified last. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not asking for revenge," I said. "I'm asking for my right to be my child's mother." The judge requested time, and time felt unbearable. Public opinion shifted slowly. Support messages began arriving. Women who understood. Mothers who saw themselves in me. For the first time, I felt less alone. By the end of Part 8, one thing was clear. The truth had entered the room. And once truth speaks, everything else starts to fall apart. When the judge returned to the courtroom, no one spoke. Not the lawyers. Not the spectators. Not even Sarah. The silence felt heavier than the verdict itself. The judge cleared his throat and began to speak. He spoke about intent, about contracts, about boundaries crossed. And then he said the words that should have felt like relief. Full legal custody is granted to the intended mother. To me, I didn't smile. I didn't cry. Because winning something that should never have been taken from you doesn't feel like victory. It feels like exhaustion. Sarah collapsed into tears. Daniel stared at the floor. The judge continued, ordering supervised visitation for Sarah, for now, and outlining consequences for violating the surrogacy agreement. Daniel's role was addressed next. Divorce proceedings would continue. Custody arrangements would follow the law, not emotion. When court adjourned, reporters swarmed. I walked past them. I didn't owe anyone my pain. Holding my daughter alone for the first time was unreal. She was warm, alive, mine. And yet, my hands shook. Because trauma doesn't disappear just because justice shows up late. Sarah apologized weeks later. Not in person. In a letter. I read it once. Then put it away. Some wounds don't need reopening. Daniel tried to reconcile. He said he'd been confused. He said he'd done what he thought was right. I listened. And I walked away. By the end of Part 9, I understood something important. Justice doesn't erase betrayal. It just gives you space to rebuild. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments. In late nights when your baby won't sleep and you realize you don't mind the exhaustion, because at least the pain makes sense now. In mornings where you wake up and remember, you survived. The first weeks alone with my daughter were terrifying. There was no one to hand her to when I needed a break. No one to share the weight. But there was also no one undermining me. No one rewriting my role. For the first time since this journey began, I was fully her mother, without question. I named her Lena, a name that meant light. Because after everything, she was exactly that. Sarah kept her distance. Supervised visits happened quietly, awkwardly. I never spoke badly about her. Because one day, my daughter may ask questions. And I want my answers to come from strength, not bitterness. Daniel faded out of our lives slowly. Not as punishment, but as consequence. Trust, once broken this deeply, doesn't rebuild on apologies alone. I rebuilt myself instead. Therapy, boundaries, a new definition of love. I stopped believing that sacrifice equals virtue. I started believing that self-respect is a form of motherhood too. One evening, months later, I held Lena close and whispered, "You were never a mistake. You were never a prize. You were never a reason for war. You were always a gift." If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Family is not defined by proximity. or blood, or even good intentions. Family is defined by who protects you when it costs them something.